Back in 2004, Nintendo released an updated model of their then current-gen console, the GameCube. This new model, the DOL-101, featured a few cost-saving cutbacks to reduce its price, such as the removal of the system's digital out port and serial port 2. It also shipped with updated firmware that supposedly prevented the use of certain cheat devices. The power supply was interestingly beefed up by 2 watts as well. While back in 2004 most users could have cared less about the missing digital out and serial 2 ports, in the present their exclusion has led to the DOL-101 being considered an inferior version of a great system, and rightfully so. The system is unable to make use of official Nintendo component cables, and by extension the growing number of GCVideo alternatives, leaving it stuck with S-Video as its best output option. The removal of serial port 2 isn't as big of a deal breaker, but it does leave those modding their systems having to use one of the system's memory card ports to house an SD card. Having accidentally purchased a DOL-101 as a backup to my main GameCube, I couldn't help but kick myself for my lack of attention. After sitting on the system for 18 months, I wanted to see if the DOL-101 could be redeemed, and sure enough, the amazing retro community has delivered, and for the last month I have been building the ultimate DOL-101. The backbone of this project was to get the 101 to output a digital video signal. The Pluto HDMI board was out of the question due to its availability and overall installation process being less ideal. Thankfully, Citrus 3000 PSI has created a digital port replacement mod for the 101 that installs much cleaner and is relatively cheap to acquire from Castlemania Games. With the video output problem solved, the rest of the project falls easily into place. An HDMI adapter is an easy choice for a simple connection to modern displays. The Insurrection Industries Carby and Retrobit Prism remain the best 2 options for this role, with the Eon GC HD Mark II being ridiculously overpriced and not compatible with the 101 anyway. And because it can never be said enough, avoid Kaiko and butt funks at all times. Retrobit's component cables can also be an option for RetroTink and OSSC use cases, but the HDMI route paired with an HDMI to component adapter provides noticeably better results in both audio and video. For my project, I am using the Retrobit Prism. With the video output taken care of, I want a way to easily boot into Swiss. On my main GameCube, I have a GC loader, which has been an amazing add-on to use and a great option for systems with broken disk drives. It is more expensive than I want for this project though, and it remains completely unavailable at this time due to the part shortage of the last few years. This leaves a type of mod chip as my best option, as relying on game exploits takes too long for my preferences. The Xeno GC remains a great option for systems with working disk drives, but an IPL-based mod is easier to keep up to date. WebHDX's PicoBoot is a perfect solution for the 101. It's both easy to install and extremely cheap by using a Raspberry Pi Pico board. The newer Kunai GC mod is also a viable option, but as of this video, it doesn't have a 101 quick solder board. It costs more as well, but future features could prove to be worth the added price. Since the 101 lacks serial port 2, an SD Gecko is needed to house the SD card I will use in this mod. As far as SD cards go, any size up to 2 TB is supported. For this project, I am temporarily using a Silicon Power 1 TB micro SD card. The last additions to my 101 project are a Game Boy player unit. Yes, I got an Indigo one because I honestly thought I had an Indigo GameCube. This is what happens when you leave things in storage for 18 months and don't check before ordering. This mistake was repeated with my noise blocker fan replacement housing from Laser Bear Industries. But finally, the last piece of the ultimate DOL-101 build is the internal BlueRetro controller replacement board from Laser Bear. This was an add-on I went back and forth on for a while, as I have an abundance of GameCube controllers and Retro Fighters Battler GC to work with. But I have been more interested in controller consolidation these days, which is what ultimately led to the decision to pick it up. Xbox Elite Series 2 controller on the GameCube, here we go. With everything in hand, the installation process commenced. I've never been too fond of disassembling GameCubes. They require the game bit, which is annoying when you first start working with older systems. Thankfully, I've had one for years at this point. Once in, the disk drive is held down by an overabundance of screws. I guess I'm happy to know the system is exceptionally secure, but honestly, this is overkill. With the disk drive removed, the GameCube heatsink needs to be unscrewed to free the motherboard from the bottom housing. Heads up, removing the heatsink from the motherboard needs to be done carefully, as trying to rip it off can result in damage to the board itself. Letting the system run with a game for 20 minutes or more lets the pads heat up to the point that it should be easy to slide off. Unfortunately, the pads don't always come off cleanly, so make sure you have replacements on hand in case they are damaged. I lucked out and my pads appear intact. Dang thing is friggin' dusty though. The process to install the digital out mod is similar to a number of HDMI mods currently on the market for other systems. You have to solder a flex cable onto the video encoder to pull the digital signal that will then be fed to the output port. With the 101, the system's current video port also needs to be removed by using either hot air or a desoldering gun. 2 additional resistors have to be removed for the flex cable to lay flat on the board. Another thing to consider while working with a DOL-101 is that it uses lead-free solder, so you will have to use lead-free as well for any connections to existing soldered parts. Again, the difficulty of this mod isn't that much different from an N64 digital. Here is my first run over the points. It wasn't quite good enough, so I ran over the points again. This isn't an installation guide more than a documentation of my journey, so be sure to check out the amazing guide that Citrus 3000 PSI has done for the full install process. The flex cable is the hardest part of the mod, so once that is out of the way, soldering the ribbon cable connector to the flex is pretty simple. The bottom of the 101 motherboard is also where the IPL chip is housed, where 2 wires need to be installed for the PicoBoot mod. With these wires in place and the flex cable placed for the digital out port, the RF shielding and case need some slight modifications to fit everything properly. I found trimming this bit off the corner for the PicoBoot wires worked very well. On the upper side of the board, 3 additional wires have to be installed for PicoBoot. Now for the new digital out port. It sits in the same place as the old analog port, but more of the case has to be trimmed to account for the 3.5mm jack that can be used for composite video and stereo audio output. But it screws easily into place and the flex cable attaches without issue. But now reassembly can commence by first reattaching the heatsink and then the disk drive. I have the replacement fan and housing from Laser Bear, so those now go into place. Unfortunately, the cables are much longer, so they will need to be routed out of the way. Swapping the BlueRetro board in only requires a Phillips screwdriver, making it a very quick procedure. Very fascinating that it hooks into the GameCube power button, but more on that in a bit. Doing the first test boot after a video mod is always so nerve-wracking, but thankfully the mod went off without a hitch. I need to change some settings on the Prism still, since I had been using it in a converted component setup previously. But now that I know video output is working as intended, the time has come to prepare the Raspberry Pi for PicoBoot. Thankfully, this is a very easy process, only requiring the Pico board, PicoBoot firmware, and a micro USB cable. With the board flashed, the 5 wires just need to be soldered to it. Greg also outdid himself by including a nice mounting point for the Pico board on his newest fan shrouds. Again, PicoBoot relies on the files stored on your SD card to boot from. Cards need to be formatted as FAT32, and the program you wish to boot goes on the root of it with the name IPL.dol. With everything working correctly, the 101 now boots directly into the latest version of Swiss. The last case modification involves drilling a hole in the backplate to let the 3.5mm jack through. Otherwise, reassembling the top of the case is pretty standard. With the mods complete, the DOL-101 is on par with any 001 model GameCube. HDMI output looks identical between the two, and running games from the SD card provides like-for-like results. While it is nice when you can tuck them out of the way in serial port 2, using slot B has never been an issue for me. I don't play any titles that require the GameCube microphone, so I don't miss out on any functionality. If you haven't had an opportunity to mess around with Swiss on a GameCube yet, definitely look into it as it provides so much functionality to the system. Forcing 480p output onto games that didn't originally support it is a game changer for output quality, and best yet, it works great with most NTSC titles. Virtual memory card support also gives users a way to save most games without the need for a physical memory card. The BlueRetro board has been an interesting experience over the last 3 days of playing with it. It isn't pairing with my controllers as nicely as I had hoped it would, but once connected they work very well. Latency is kept to a minimum and remains mostly unnoticeable in everything I have tried. The fact that you can use it to put the GameCube to sleep is also a fun additional feature that turns the system into something more modern. When finishing playing, just hit the hotkey to deactivate the system. To wake it back up, just turn on the paired controller and it comes back up. The reset button can also be used to accomplish this. A very cool piece of tech for GameCube that is worth looking into if you want to consolidate controllers. Would I recommend doing an Ultimate DOL-101 mod? I have 2 answers for that question if you already happen to own a 101. If you have the soldering skills to install everything, then it could be a great way to get a better experience out of the system. If not, a DOL-001 should be sought out. It might be a bit more expensive than the internal mod, but it's not worth the risk of poor soldering breaking your system. The rest of the mods are going to be equivalent between both models. Regardless, this process has been a ton of fun and has helped me further refine my skills. To think, 2 years ago I failed at installing an SNES Junior RGB mod, but the Ultimate DOL-101 project doesn't end here. I hope to eventually add a MemCard Pro GC to the mix, and maybe a purple replacement shell from Muramasa Entertainment to better match my goofed color selections. But for now, I'm gonna get back to playing some GameCube games.